guest, Jamon Jordan, City of Detroit historian and founder of the Black Scroll Network, History and Tours, LLC. And this week's hot takes from Bridge Detroit. Election tonight, Christina Caramo to lead Michigan GOP, topping Trump favorite, and jobs and pay rise, but Black and Hispanic Detroiters are missing out. Keep it locked. Authentically Detroit starts after these messages. All right, let's do it one more time, y'all. Another episode of Authentically Detroit, broadcasting live from Detroit's East Side at the Stoudemire, inside of the East Side Community Network headquarters. We're a content partner at BridgeDetroit.com. I'm Orlando Bailey.
And I'm Donna Gibbons-Davidson.
Thank you for being here and supporting our efforts to like, rate, and subscribe to our podcast on all platforms. And today, we're switching things up, y'all. I know we normally start with hot takes, but since Jamon Jordan, founder of the Black Scroll Network, History and Tours, is here at the Stoudemire with Donna and I for a live episode, we're doing things a little differently. So, in honor of Black History Month, we've invited Jamon to share Detroit's history and the building of Black power in Detroit. Jamon, take it away.
Yeah.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
What up, though?
What up?
All right, so we're here in the city of Detroit. My name is Jamon Jordan. You already know I am the founder of Black Scroll Network History and Tours. I lead tours and lectures dealing with Detroit's African-American history and, of course, African-American history in other places too, but especially Detroit's history. And I'm also the official historian for the city of Detroit. And I've been serving in that capacity since October of 2021. So I'm happy to be your historian. I am the people's historian. I am the historian for the city of Detroit. Now, today what I'm going to be talking about is really the building of Black power in the city of Detroit. And really what that is showing that Detroit is really one of the models for radical Black organizing in America's history.
Yes, it is.
And so many people don't know this. And it's really a problem of the system of how we're educated. Number one, how we're educated about civil rights, the Black Power movement, or largely what we know as the Black Freedom movement. We're largely educated that the Black Freedom movement, the civil rights movement, was a Southern phenomenon. So that's the first thing we're taught. Most of us have heard, even if we don't know the full story, we've heard that it was a bus boycott in Montgomery, Alabama. We know that there was something called Freedom Summer in Mississippi. We know that there was a march or some marches in Selma, Alabama for voting rights. We know that the police sick dogs and put fire hoses on children in Birmingham, Alabama. So we know about these Southern campaigns for freedom, these Southern campaigns for racial justice. But at the same time that that's going on, there are people doing all kinds of activism in New York, in Cleveland, in Cincinnati, in Philadelphia, in Pittsburgh, in Boston, in Chicago, and in Detroit.
Yes.
But that part has been left out of many people's education. I'm not even talking about people in Mississippi don't learn about this happening in Detroit. People in Detroit don't learn about that this stuff happened in the city of Detroit. So that's one of the reasons. It's not our fault that we focus on the civil rights movement as a Southern phenomenon. It's how we've been taught. And part of the reason why it's taught that way, especially in the North, that there really wasn't no civil rights movement, is because there has been a propaganda campaign that has always centered the South as where the racial problem was. So if you go back to the Civil War, pre-Civil War, slavery was a Southern phenomenon. And we're taught to think of slavery as something that happened down South. We're not taught to think that New Jersey had slavery. We're not taught that New York has slavery, that Rhode Island has slavery, that Delaware has slavery, that Connecticut has slavery, that Detroit has slavery. We're not taught to think of it that way, but all of the places I just named also had slavery. When America was 13 British colonies, all 13 colonies had slavery. Not just Virginia, North and South Carolina, Georgia, not just those of the 13 colonies. Massachusetts had slavery. Delaware has slavery, Rhode Island has slavery, New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey has slavery. Now, of course, Michigan wasn't part of the 13 colonies. The French had come here, and the French had slavery here, right? So slavery was a national phenomenon. It wasn't just a Southern phenomenon, but after the Civil War, schools, newspapers, political leaders began to present the image that slavery thing down South, we fought a war against those villains in the South over slavery. Never really talking about how, number one, the North was totally involved in slavery in the South.
Yeah.
Slavery in the South could not have lasted as long if the North wasn't totally invested in it. So the North is part of what was going on down South. Rhode Island is the Walmart for Southern plantations. The state of Rhode Island is the Walmart for Southern plantations. What do I mean by that? Southern plantations are growing cotton, tobacco, rice, and sugar, mainly to make profit. These are profit-making crops. They're not growing corn and wheat, not at large levels in Mississippi. They're not doing that. They're not growing corn and stuff that's going to feed them. Well, where's their food coming from? Rhode Island is supplying, that's mainly what Rhode Island is doing. It is supplying the foodstuffs for the South. Also providing much of the clothing, because they're not making clothes in the South. So they're providing much of the clothing in the South. What will be known as Negro cloth is being made in mills and in factories in Providence, Rhode Island. And so this Negro cloth, this thick, durable, strong cloth, which means that slave owners who are clothing the people who are enslaved on their plantation with this cloth don't have to worry about replenishing it that often. It's a very thick cloth. So they're buying that from Rhode Island. There's a company in New York who's making clothes out of it. So they're making clothes and sending and selling it to Mississippi plantation owners and Caribbean plantation owners, because slavery's in the Caribbean too. They're selling it to them, and they're also selling the clothes for the slave owners themselves. That company, you know it, it's Brooks Brothers.
Right.
That's Brooks Brothers. That's what they did. That's how they became so wealthy. That's what they started doing. They're supplying the clothing for the slave owners and the people who are enslaved. When Lord Strauss comes from Germany to America, and he starts his company, because the durable clothing that he's making is very similar to the Negro cloth that had been made prior to him coming here, he buys their patent. He buys the patent from Rhode Island so that he doesn't have to worry about any competition for this thick, durable cloth. That durable cloth today, that Lord Strauss, we don't call him Lord Strauss, we call him Levi Strauss. He's making denim, and he buys the patent from those Rhode Island Negro cloth makers because he doesn't want them to open back up and compete against him. So he buys their patent so that he can make his denim. All right? So the North is invested in what's going on down South. The South could not be whatever it was without the North. But on top of that, the North has slavery.
Yeah.
Right? So that's the other part. The North has slavery. Wall Street is named that because there is a wall that was built to separate the financial district and where the wealthy folks lived from where the enslaved people lived and where the indentured servants lived. It wasn't like the plantation system down South where you live on the estate, you live on the land of the slave owner. That's how plantation slavery is in the South. The enslaved people live on the same land by their slave owners. Well, in New York, it wasn't done that way. You were enslaved by someone, at first the Dutch. So before it was New York, it was New Amsterdam. And so first it's the Dutch slave owners. You were enslaved by them, but you don't live at their house, on their land. You live in a whole community where Negroes and indentured servants live. And you get up and go to work every day. And a wall is built to separate where trading is done. So selling cows and horses and food and implements and tools, they sell that. Well, that's the border. And that wall was built by those indentured servants and enslaved people, and we call it Wall Street today. All right? So the North is involved in slavery, and of course, Detroit will be a part of this story as well. Not by the British or the Dutch. Well, actually, the British will get involved in Detroit, but at first it's the French. So the French is why we call this city Detroit. When they arrived here in 1701, Antoine de la Moussure de Cadillac, you know, the car is named after this person, this Frenchman, who comes to the city of Detroit on July 24th, 1701, and builds a fort, Fort Pontchartrain du Detroit. He builds this fort. This fort is basically down at the riverfront, roughly where a portion of Hart Plaza is, the kind of the western portion of Hart Plaza, and also where Huntington Place is. Well, we used to call it Cobo Hall, but that's Huntington Place. And that fort will get expanded. Other forts will be built adjacent to it or north of it. So it's Fort Pontchartrain du Detroit. Eventually, we just call it Fort Detroit. And then Fort Lerneau, Fort Shelby. Those forts, which are all they're all connected to one another, start at the river and go all the way to 4th Street. That's why it's called 4th Street, because that's the border, the northern border of the fort. Well, these Frenchmen who are here for the fur trade, that's why they come. That's why Cadillac is here, is for the fur trade. So beavers, deer, raccoon, all of these fur-bearing animals, but especially beaver. These fur-bearing animals, the French are turning it into a economic system, a major form of trade. They're trading with one another. They're trading with the British, and they're trading with the indigenous people. And in Detroit and Michigan, that's the Anishinaabe. The Anishinaabe are the Odawa, you may know them as the Ottawa, the Potawatomi, you may know them as the Potawatomi, and the Ojibwe, which the French will corrupt to the word Chippewa. These, the Ojibwe, the Odawa, the Potawatomi, are the main groups of indigenous people. There are other indigenous people here too, but those are the largest groups that are in Michigan and in and around the city of Detroit. So when the French here have a fur trade with them, they're knee deep in a different trade, the slave trade. And so they bring slavery with them. They're enslaving both Africans and Native Americans. And so we have these slave owners here. These slave owners are building farms. And you know some of those French slave owners' names. I know you know. Alexander Shin. You don't say that. You say Shane.
Yeah.
Louis Beaufet. You know that street. Beaufet. Yeah, you know that. Joseph Campau. Joseph Campau. We say Joseph Campau, but that's him. Same French landowner, wealthy Louis de Ville de Quinder. We say de Quinder. Jean Rivard. We say Rivard Street. Antoine Beaubien. We say Beaubien. All of these people I just named are slave owners in the city of Detroit. And the West Side ain't exempt. Francois Benoit Saint-Noir. We say Livernois. The city of Detroit. Jean Saint Martin. We say Saint Martin on the West Side. So it's about 22 streets in the city of Detroit named after French landowners, French and British landowners who were also slave owners. When the British take over, they do exactly what the French have been doing. So the British take over in 1760. So they have farms and enslaved Africans and Native Americans. We know their names too. We know George McDougal. You know that name. We know William McComb. We say McComb today. We know these names. These are also slave owners. We know George Meldrum. So these are also slave owners in the city of Detroit. And so the British and French have slavery, but if you got slavery, you're going to have resistance to slavery.
Yes.
You're going to have people fighting. You're going to have people fighting and killing their slave owners. You're going to have people running away. You're going to have people breaking the tools. You're going to have people burning the crops. You're going to have people even suing for freedom. They take the cases to court to get free. You got people escaping to Canada. And so Detroit won't just be a place where slavery happened. It'll be a place that'll be a fountainhead of the battle and resistance against slavery.
Yes.
That's really the roots of Detroit's black militant history, is that from its early stages, if you got slavery, you're gonna have people fighting against it. And what adds to that is Detroit sits on this international border with another country that ended slavery before the United States. Canada had slavery. So don't think that, they were exempt. Was it French people there? Was it British people there? Okay, so they had slavery. So Canada had slavery, but they ended it before the United States. And that means Detroit sits on the international border with a place that is no longer practicing slavery. So that is going to make it a hub of people who are opposed to slavery, who are not only going to escape themselves, but help other folks escape. And so now Detroit becomes a center for the Underground Railroad activity. And the Underground Railroad activity in the city of Detroit is a little different than it looks in other places. Every place the Underground Railroad is existing is a little different. It takes on some of the culture of the people who are already there. So Philadelphia, it's Underground Railroad in Philadelphia, Underground Railroad in Baltimore, Underground Railroad in Boston, New Jersey, New York, particularly Rochester, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, but Detroit has its own version of this freedom movement. Some of the people who are important for you to know this story are people like George D. Baptiste. George D. Baptiste, that's him on the Gateway to Freedom International Underground Railroad Monument pointing across the river. So if you're down at the riverfront and you see that monument, that Underground Railroad monument, this man pointing across the river, that's this black rich man, this black millionaire who owns his own steamship, the T. Whitney, who's pointing across the river because he's about to take this group of people to freedom. He plays all the roles on the Underground Railroad because the Underground Railroad ain't underground, it ain't a railroad. All right, so there is no subway from Mississippi to Michigan. All right, so it's not an underground railroad. It is the people, the places, and the routes that are used to help people escape from slavery. The people have different positions. The places are stations. So hiding somebody or somebody's in a house, a church, a barn, a cellar, an attic, a hidden room, that's a station or a depot on the Underground Railroad. They're using railroad terminology even though it's not really a railroad, all right? So that's a station, but the person hiding them is a station master. So if you're hiding somebody, it's a station master. All right, so George D. Baptiste is a station master on the Underground Railroad. So he hides people in his house. Another station master you ought to know is Seymour Finney. Seymour Finney is a white station master. So George D. Baptiste is black, but Seymour Finney is a white man who's hiding people in his barn in Capitol Park, in what is now downtown Detroit. He owns an inn, a hotel, and around the corner is the barn, because the people stay at his inn, they need to store their horses and their wagons somewhere. So he feels like that money should come to him too. You already staying at my hotel, well, pay me and I'll store your horses and wagons too. But behind 2 tons of hay, in that barn is a hiding place where people who have escaped from slavery are being hidden in his station. Seymour Finney is important, particularly on the east side, because there was a school named Finney High School. Yes. And it was named after the son of Seymour Finney, Jared Finney. All right, so it was named after his son. So you should know where that name comes from. Where did Finney High School come from? Who is that person? He's Jared Finney, who would become a U.S. attorney, but his father was a station master on the Underground Railroad. Right? But George D. Baptiste does that. He hides people in his home. Another job on the Underground Railroad is a stockholder. A stockholder is a person who donates money, food, wagons, horses, resources to the Underground Railroad. The Underground Railroad need resources. And you couldn't get a Ford Foundation grant for the Underground Railroad. Kresge Arts wasn't giving out grants for the Underground Railroad. So you had to be funded some other kind of way. And it was funded by people who had resources. And they contributed those resources, which shows you that the wealthy or the people who have resources aren't separating themselves from the people who don't. Because if people escaping from slavery have nothing, they escape from slavery. So, of course, they don't have money. But these free black people, some of whom have attained some level of wealth, are not saying, hey, I'm wealthy, I'm free. Y'all got to make it the best way you can. Pull yourself up. You know, they're not saying that. They're saying, I'm free. I got to do something with the resources I have to help other people get free. And so George D. Baptiste is a stockholder on the Underground Railroad. And then another job on the Underground Railroad is the most dangerous job on the Underground Railroad. It is a conductor. It is a person who takes people from one place to another. The most famous conductor on the Underground Railroad is Harriet Tubman. Now, of course, Harriet Tubman never came to the city of Detroit. So there has to be some other conductors in Detroit that's doing that kind of work. George D. Baptiste is also a conductor on the Underground Railroad. He is co-founded two organizations, the Color Vigilant Committee and the African Mysteries Order of the Men of Oppression. Since he's a Prince Hall Freemason, he merges Prince Hall Freemason initiation rituals with Underground Railroad activity, which means you got to be initiated to be in the order of oppression, the African Men of Mystery. You got to be initiated. You can't just show up at the meeting and say, hey, I'll help y'all. No, we don't know you. You got to go through this initiation. What's number one on the initiation? You got to go down south and rescue somebody from a plantation. That's a little bit different than pledging a fraternity. A little bit different. Crossing the burning sands is a whole different meaning. When you're helping somebody escape from slavery, and slave catchers are after you, and they'll kill you to capture their what they call their property. All right? So he does that too. And so Detroit becomes a center of that kind of activity. William and Julia Willoughby Lambert, this man and his wife, they do all the same things I just said George D. Baptiste did. They do that too. They also hosted Frederick Douglass. When Frederick Douglass came to Detroit, he stayed at William and Julia Lambert's house. Now, George D. Baptiste lived on Beaubien and Larned, on the corner of Beaubien and Larned. That's Black Bottom. That would have been almost at the western edge of Black Bottom. And so he lived in Black Bottom. That's the east side. All right? William Lambert lived on Larned in St. Albans. That's Black Bottom too. That's where Frederick Douglass stayed when he came to the city of Detroit, at William and Julia Lambert's house. Now, Julia and Willoughby Lambert had met years ago. Julia was 8 years old. William was 13 years old. When he first came to Detroit, he's a free young black man from New Jersey. He's been educated by Quakers. He comes to the city of Detroit, working on the docks, and stays. He's like, I like it here, and he stays. While he's here, two people have escaped from slavery. So he's 13 years old. Two people have escaped from slavery. Thornton and Lucy Blackburn. They escaped from Louisville, Kentucky. Why did they escape? Well, Lucy was phony. If y'all don't know what that means, okay, so I'm gonna say that again first, because some people didn't catch it. Lucy was phony, F-O-I-N-E exclamation point, and that means she's very beautiful. Now, this beautiful woman, she knows, and many people know, and you ought to know, that being a beautiful woman enslaved on a plantation can be dangerous for you. Her slave owner realizes that he can make more money than having her work out in the fields. And he sells her down the river. We still say that phrase. You sold me down the river. You sold down the river. It's a slavery phrase. Sold into the deep south where slavery is much more harsh. She sold into New Orleans. New Orleans is the largest slave market in America's history. More people were bought and sold in New Orleans than any other place in the United States. She sold down into New Orleans as a fancy woman. And of course, that's sexual slavery. We would call it human sex trafficking today, where her slave owner makes the money from her forced prostitution. That's how she sold. Thornton, who loves her, and she, loving herself, don't want that life for her. So they escape. So she's been sold, but she ain't never gonna go to New Orleans. So she's been sold down to New Orleans, but before she's ever taken to New Orleans, she's in Detroit. Her and her husband have escaped. They live here in the city of Detroit until slave catchers come to the city of Detroit. Pay the sheriff and deputy $50 apiece to help them capture Thornton and Lucy, who they know are somewhere in this city. and they captured them, and they put them in the old jail on Farmer and Gratiot. Today, that's where the Skillman Public Library is. But there used to be a jail there. That's where they're held from Friday to Monday. They're gonna be held there on Monday. A steamboat will have come up, take them down to Ohio, then put them on a wagon and wagon them back to Kentucky. And of course, her final destination is meant to be New Orleans. And Thornton's final destination is in Kentucky, but where he would be harshly dealt with for this escape. But that ain't never gonna happen. Because at the home of Benjamin Willoughby, there's that name, you heard Julia Willoughby Lambert, Benjamin Willoughby, there's a meeting. At this meeting, two women, so Benjamin Willoughby is his house, so he's one of the leaders. But there's two women who are leaders too. I want you to know their names too. Caroline French and Tabitha Lightfoot. Caroline who?
French.
Tabitha what?
Lightfoot.
These two black women aren't just serving tea and cookies at this meeting. They leaders, organizing. Hey, these are friends. What we gonna do, y'all? They escaped from slavery and the slave catchers come and got them. They in jail. They gonna take them back down. What we gonna do? We gonna let that happen? And these women are like, no, we ain't gonna let that happen. These are our friends. We gotta do something. And they come up with a plan. And on Sunday after church, they all church people. So they go to church. Most of the leaders are members of First Baptist Church. First Baptist Church is a predominantly white church, but it has a number of black members, about 18 black members. 13 of those members was at this meeting. Okay. All right. And so they have this meeting, and they say, after church, they go down to the jail to visit Thornton and Lucy Blackburn. Hey, our friends are in there. Can we visit them before they get taken back down south? The sheriff and deputy turn away everybody that tried to visit Thornton. They're so scared of him, they got him behind bars in shackles. They're like, the bars ain't enough. We gotta have him in chains behind the bars. But they're not scared of this black woman. They don't fear her. So she's allowed to have visitors. They're not scared that she's gonna try something. Big mistake on their part. They let Caroline French and Tabitha Lightfoot go in the jail cell with Lucy Blackburn. While in the jail cell, they're praying with her because they believe that prayer changes things. While also in the jail, they give her some food because they know that jail food she's been eating is horrible. Jail food is horrible food to this day. Don't ask me how I know. But while they're feeding her and praying with her, Caroline French switches clothes with Lucy Blackburn inside of the jail cell. And when the sheriff comes to the jail and says, you gals gotta go, Tabitha Lightfoot walks out with Lucy Blackburn wearing Caroline French's clothes. To the sheriff, these women look alike, he don't know the difference, they walk right by him. They put her on the boat, send her over to Canada, and she is free. She's on free soil, she's free. The next morning, Caroline French, who lives on 4th Street between Beaubien and Monroe. That's East Side.
East Side.
All right. So she says, you, Mr. Sheriff, guess what? I'm Caroline French. I'm not Lucy Blackburn. See, look at me. I ain't see. I'm not her. She walked right by you yesterday and you ain't even know. She got on the boat because that was our plan, and she's in Canada by now, so she's free, and I'm free too. You better let me go.
All right.
And the slave catchers, they're bounty hunters. They make money for bringing people back. They don't make money if you don't come back.
Right.
So they done lost their bounty, a portion of their bounty. So they say, you switched. Well, you really gonna switch. We're gonna sell you to make up whatever we lost with her. And Caroline French said, I'm from Detroit. Plus I'm from the East Side. That's not gonna happen. They would walk out of the jail cell, there's 400 people outside with bricks, sticks, knives, swords. That's right, they had swords, poles, tree branches. Some of them had guns. Shovels. Now you got the sheriff, the deputy, they got rifles. There's 4 of them, but it's 400 people. And they can do the math. Okay, if we shoot, then we die. After that, we get those shots off, and then they go kill us. And in the melee, the sheriff will be killed. Thornton will be rescued, put on a boat, cross over the Canada, reunited with his wife, and he's free. They will go up to Toronto and start the first taxi business in the city of Toronto and become wealthy, build 5 homes for other people who escaped from slavery so that they have somewhere to live. Just like people help them, they use their wealth to help other people. The people who organized the freedom of Thornton and Lucy Blackburn will found Second Baptist Church, the oldest black church in the state of Michigan, the first school for black people, and a station on the Underground Railroad. All right? That church is found. 30 churches come out of that church. All right? That creates this black community. And that little girl who was there, she was 8 years old when this happened. Julia Willoughby. It was in her house where the meeting happened. She grows up in an Underground Railroad house. 13-year-old William Lambert was there too. They will get married and become a team, an Underground Railroad team. And they will found St. Matthew's Episcopal Church, the 3rd black church in the city of Detroit, in the North End. Today it's on Woodward and King, but originally was on St. Antoine and Congress in Black Bottom, East Side. All right. So this is the foundation for why Detroit is militant and has this radical resistance, because everything comes out of this. Second Baptist Church is a part of the Underground Railroad. It's founded by people who helped free Thornton and Lucy Blackburn. All of the 30 other churches that will end up are somehow connected to this history. So when we get to the Civil Rights Movement, in this neighborhood, when Dr. Ocean Sweet moves into his house on Garland and Charlevoix, he's not going to walk away non-violently when the mob shows up in his house. He's going to defend his house with guns. And 2 white folks outside are going to fall that night. One won't ever get up again. Because Ocean Sweet is defending his home against a racist mob. Him, his brother, his wife, his friends, his cousin, 2 of his brothers, his chauffeur, his handyman, they're all defending that home in 1925 on the corner of Garland and Charlevoix, East Side. By the time we get to the 1940s, and there's going to be a race riot that starts at Belle Isle, I want you to understand that 34 people were killed in the 1943 race riot. But I don't want you to think that this was just black people being victimized in the 1943 race riot. 9 whites were killed in the 1943 race riot by black people. 7 black people were killed by white citizens in the 1943 race riot. It was almost even on the streets. The reason why 25 black people get killed in the 1943 race riot is because 17 black people are killed by members of the Detroit Police Department. No whites are killed by members of the Detroit Police Department in the 1943 race riot. That's the difference. That the police are rioting too, and they've chosen a side. If it had just been in the streets, it would have been black folks getting and giving about at the same level as whites were getting and giving. Because Detroit is not known for non-violent civil disobedience. It's not what it's known for. When black people are able to move into the Sojourner Truth homes and a white mob blocks African Americans from moving in February of 1942, they done paid their deposits, you done paid their deposit. It's move-in day, and there's a white wall of people saying you ain't moving in. This Detroit, East Side, Nevada and Fenelon. Black folks say, what? All right. Or some mob of y'all, okay, I'm going to get Man, Tyrone, we coming back. I'm moving in. And when they come back to move in, you can even look up the pictures. You can see people with stuff in their hand ready to fight this mob. The police arrest the black folks. They don't arrest the white mob who's illegally blocking black people moving in. They arrest black people. And it would take the National Guard and the Army to disperse all of this, and eventually black people will be able to move in. But black people aren't going for we're going to be nonviolent on this. And that's not Detroit's history, because it goes all the way back to this Underground Railroad. When the sheriff got killed, they didn't turn the other cheek on the sheriff when they freed Thornton and Lucy Blackburn. So this is a part of Detroit's movement. When Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on Thursday, December 1st, 1955, And there's a 382-day bus boycott in Montgomery, Alabama. And after that bus boycott is over, she can't get a job in Montgomery because everybody knows her. Every white company knows her, and she can't get a job. She comes to the city of Detroit, but before the bus boycott is over, she's invited to the city of Detroit by UAW Local 600, which is the most radical of the union shops in the city of Detroit. Walter Reuther does not want her to come. He's the head of the whole in UAW. But UAW Local 600 said, we don't care about what Walter Reuther said. We're going to bring her. In the National Negro Labor Congress, Executive Secretary Coleman Alexander Young is the host.
All right.
East Side.
East Side.
Black Bottom. And so she comes here, she speaks, she's given an honorarium, and then a year later she'll have to move here to be able to support herself and her mother. And then eventually she'll be supporting herself, her husband, and her mother, because her husband will get ulcers. He will develop stomach ulcers and be unable to work. So she's supporting 3 people in the city of Detroit. And she's a radical activist. You know her for refusing to give up her seat and think that's all she did. Her life is so much more than that. Before she refused to give up her seat, she's investigating the rapes of black women in Montgomery, Alabama, as the investigator for the NAACP. Before she does that, she's organizing for the Scottsboro boys who've been arrested because they've been accused of rape of a white girl. And she's organizing for them. And when she gets to the city of Detroit, she's organizing for the Republic of New Africa.
Yeah.
She's organizing fundraising for Angela Davis.
Yes.
So this is not the Rosa Parks y'all used to hearing about. This quiet middle class, they always say she was middle class. She lived in the projects in Montgomery. She was never middle class.
Yeah.
Right? So, but she was she had dignity, she had this dignified persona. And so we tend to associate that with middle class. But she wasn't. She was poor there and she was poor here. All right? But she was involved in activism her whole life. She fought for black people her whole life. And there is no way you can talk about the city of Detroit and not talk about the fact that Detroit becomes the fountain for black radical movement. There are radicals, militants coming to the city of Detroit to learn from James and Grace Lee Boggs, to learn from General Baker, to learn from these activists who are already here in the city of Detroit. A lot of these people don't get the national acclaim that we attribute to Martin Luther King Jr., that we attribute to even Malcolm X, that we attribute to Angela Davis, the Black Panther Party. But we had these movements in the city of Detroit, and there are people who are coming from all those other places, all those other organizations, to learn about organizing, militant organizing from folks in the city of Detroit. So don't ever let somebody make you think that Detroit hasn't been at the forefront. Part of the reason you think that is because we've been taught that the North wasn't a part of the civil rights movement. So some of it ain't just about Detroit, it's about the North, period. Nowhere in the North was all this activity happening. But that's a false way that we've been taught about history and about the freedom movement. That's the first problem. The other problem is that people think of Detroit as a place that was always a failure. It's a place where all you can see is people who are deviant, dysfunctional, and dangerous. But Detroit, that because of that Underground Railroad, you get Second Baptist Church, 30 other black churches, and you will end up getting a whole community known as Black Bottom. Because of Black Bottom, you will get Paradise Valley, the black business and entertainment district, 350 black-owned businesses by the 1920s and 30s. Because of that building businesses around entertainment, you get Berry Gordy borrowing $800 from his family to open up Tamla Records. But before that year was over, Tamla Records would be known as Motown. All of this history is connected. We just have to connect the dots. Thank you for listening.